Imagine you spend 40 years building a house, not with wood and nails, but with your life's work. Every early morning, every missed school play, every dinner that grew cold on the table, each one was a brick. One brick for every missed birthday, one for every overtime shift that bled into a weekend. My husband John laid those bricks with hands stained in grease, believing he was building a fortress for our future. That company wasn't just a job, it was the architect of our security, and we were about to learn that house had no foundation at all. For 40 years, the sound of his work boots on the porch was the sound of safety. We built our whole world on that promise. Our home, with the big oak tree our kids learned to climb, the kitchen where I must have packed 1,000 school lunches. We even planted a rose garden by the back fence. I remember the day we did it, our knees sore from the dirt, planning aloud how we'd spend our golden years tending to it together, a cup of coffee in hand on cool spring mornings. But now, when I look out the window, the weeds have choked out the last of the blooms. They just gave up. What do you do when your whole future disappears in a single envelope? We were about to watch our entire world get washed away. I remember his retirement party like it was yesterday. The community hall smelled of cheap coffee and sheet cake. His coworkers, men he'd stood shoulder to shoulder with for decades, slapped him on the back, their faces a mix of envy and real happiness. They gave him a gold watch. A cliché, I know, but to John, it was a medal. A symbol of a life well lived, a race well run. He stood up to give a speech, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about loyalty, about the dignity of a hard day's work, and about the future. Our future. I remember a quiet moment years ago, sitting on the porch swing after a long week. He'd just finished a double shift. He took my hand and said, "One day, Mary, we won't have to worry about any of this. It'll just be us in the open road." That night of his retirement, we went home and toasted with sparkling cider, feeling like that one day had finally arrived. The finish line. We thought it couldn't get worse. We were wrong. And then, a few months later, a letter showed up. A single, crisp envelope on the kitchen table. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. But in the time it took to read that one paragraph, our entire world vanished. The paper felt cold in my hands. It was a formal notice, full of corporate jargon that felt cruel in its detachment. Words like Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation, and termination of obligations swam in front of my eyes. I pulled out the old benefits folder from the hall closet, the one with the glossy brochure. It had a picture of a smiling gray-haired couple on a boat. It promised security. In a moment of quiet rage, I read the headline aloud to the empty room, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Guaranteed for life. I paused, then tore the glossy paper in half. It delivered silence. I only really understood one thing. The company was gone, and the pension fund, our fortress, was underfunded. Such a small, clinical word for the complete devastation of our lives. I walked out to the garage where John was organizing his tools, a happy new habit of his retired life. In that silent walk from the kitchen, I flashed back to a memory of our son, maybe 7 years old, clattering down the stairs, and I realized with a sudden pang that the house was now always this quiet. I didn't have to say a word. He just looked at my face, and all the color drained from his. He took the letter. His calloused fingers traced the crease where I'd folded it. He read it, his lips moving silently. Then he just stood there, staring at the page, the gold watch on his wrist suddenly looking like a cheap prop. He finally looked up at me, his eyes hollow. 40 years, he whispered, shaking his head. For this? Mary, what was it all for? He sank onto a stool, the letter dangling from his hand. The silence in that garage was deafening. Later that night, I found him there, asleep on the stool, his head resting against a workbench. The letter was still clutched in his hand. I gently took it from his fingers, folded it, and laid a wool blanket over his shoulders. The scream that would come later would echo through our family forever. The days that followed were a blur of fear. We spent hours on hold, listening to tinny music, just waiting for a human voice that could offer a lifeline. The company's HR number was disconnected. The pension office was a maze of automated menus. We felt utterly alone until we started hearing the whispers at the grocery store, at church. Other families from the plant, their faces etched with the same terror. I ran into Sarah Higgins after service. She hugged me, her own eyes filled with tears. "We were told to be grateful," she whispered. "I wish I'd asked more questions. We weren't just a single tragedy. We were part of a quiet, sprawling catastrophe." That's when we first heard the name, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, the PBGC. It sounded so official, so reassuring. For a moment, a sliver of hope cut through the despair. The government had insurance for this. We dove into research at the library, and that hope surged. We found articles about the American Rescue Plan, a new law pumping billions into the system to save pensions just like John's. We looked at each other, tears in our eyes. We were going to be okay. We thought we'd found our rescue boat, but we didn't know it was already sinking. That hope was a mirage. We kept digging and realized our plan was already terminated, in liquidation. The rescue boat had arrived, but our ship was already at the bottom of the sea. Even if we got something, the PBGC's maximum benefit was a fraction of what we were promised. The strain started to show. We argued about money, something we'd never done in 45 years. John changed. He'd just sit in his armchair for hours, staring out the window. One evening, he said so quietly I almost didn't hear him, "I feel like I'm invisible now, like I don't matter." I knelt by his chair and took his hand. "I see you," I said. "I've always seen you. Your worth was never in a paycheck." But I could see he didn't believe me. He was betrayed. I told him that over and over, but I was crumbling inside. We didn't realize the cruelest betrayal would come from someone we loved, asking us a question we weren't ready to answer. The promised envelope from the PBGC finally arrived. It wasn't a check. It was more forms, more dense legalese demanding proof of his 40 years of labor, as if his calloused hands and the deep lines on his face weren't proof enough. We were no longer John and Mary. We were a case number. We tried our local congressman's office. A young aide listened sympathetically. A week later, she called back. "I'm so sorry," she said, "but with a Chapter 7 liquidation, our hands are tied." Our hands are tied. I remember thinking how easy it was for her to say that. Her hands were tied. Our throats were closing. Then the creditors started calling. I'd usually let it go to voicemail, but one afternoon, John answered. I heard his voice, trying to explain, and then the sharp, uncaring voice on the other end cut him off. "Sir, your situation is not our problem. Payment is due on the 1st." He hung up the phone, his face pale with humiliation. But that wasn't the moment that broke us. The final blow came at Sunday dinner. The house was filled with the smell of roast chicken and the sound of our grandkids' laughter, a small, perfect pocket of normalcy in our chaos. Our granddaughter, Emily, was buzzing with excitement. "I just toured the university. It was amazing," she said, her face glowing. The joy was infectious, and for a moment we were just a family again. Then she looked right at us. "Grandma, Grandpa, you're still going to help with my college fund, right? You always said you would." The laughter stopped. The air went thin. I looked at our son, saw the worry cloud his face. I saw pure agony on John's. He opened his mouth, but a choked sound was all that came out. I had to be the one to answer. "Honey," I started, my voice trembling. "Things are a little different for Grandpa and me right now. We might not be able to help as much as we wanted." The confusion on her face, the way her smile faltered, it was more painful than any collection call. That night, after they left, John sat in his chair and wept. Not quiet tears, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a broken man. "I can't even help my own granddaughter," he choked out. "What good am I?" In that moment, I knew they hadn't just stolen our money. They had stolen his soul. Months crawled by. The tipping point came on a Tuesday. A certified letter from the bank. A formal notice of foreclosure. We had 90 days. The house that held 45 years of our memories was being ripped away. That night I had a dream. I was walking through our old home, but every room was empty, echoing. The furniture was gone. The pictures were off the walls. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, and reached for John's hand in the dark. "We're still here," I whispered into the silence. He squeezed my hand back. The next night, we called the kids. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could hear the confusion in our daughter's voice, the awkward silence as the reality sank in, the way it quickly turned to guilt and hurried offers. "You can move in with us," she said. I was so grateful, but the thought of living in a spare bedroom, a ghost in our children's lives, filled me with a unique kind of dread. Later that night, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I saw the fear in my eyes, the new lines etched around my mouth. I used to be the rock, the planner, the matriarch. Now I was scared of grocery totals. I used to cry in the shower where he couldn't hear me, carrying the weight silently like so many women of my generation learned to do. We kept the house clean, the kids fed, and our worries to ourselves. And still it wasn't enough. But underneath the fear, I saw something else. A flicker of anger. Not John's helpless rage, but a cold, clear fury. We had done everything right. "We're not moving in with the kids," I told John the next morning, my voice steady for the first time in months. He looked surprised. "Where will we go?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, spreading our few remaining bank statements on the kitchen table. "But it will be ours. We're going to sell this house before the bank takes it. We'll take what little we have left, and we'll start over. They may have taken our pension, but they will not take our control." The dream of retirement was dead. In its place, a harder dream was being born. Survival. The next few months were a whirlwind of painful goodbyes. We held an estate sale. Watching strangers haggle over our wedding china was excruciating. A woman picked up the silver frame holding our wedding photo. "How much for this?" she asked. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice polite but firm. "That's not for sale." She shrugged and moved on, but inside I was screaming. "You can't buy this. You can't have this memory. This is all I have left." I couldn't part with a cracked coffee mug John had always used, its handle worn smooth. But John insisted we sell the big dining set we'd hosted so many holidays around. He needed to feel like he was providing in some way. With every item that left, I felt a little lighter, shedding a life that was no longer ours. We found a small one-bedroom apartment in a senior community. It's a quiet life, a smaller life. Our new tradition is having tea on the tiny balcony every morning, listening to the birds. A check from the PBGC did finally arrive. Less than a third of what John's pension should have been. A year ago, it would have been an insult. Now, it just helps pay the rent. I manage our tiny budget with the precision of a drill sergeant. Last week, I found a way to save $10 on our groceries. It felt like a tiny victory. On the way home, I bought a box of his favorite oatmeal cookies. That evening, he looked at me over his cup of tea and said, "You got the cookies." He noticed. It mattered. It's not about fear. It's about empowerment. John is changing too. He joined the community woodworking club. He built a beautiful bookshelf for the common room, and the praise he got from our neighbors made him stand a little taller. Last week, he gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a single, perfectly carved rose, a symbol of our new life. Seeing the quiet pride on his face. It was the first time in years I saw the man I married. He was a provider again. We lost the house John built with his labor, but we're learning to build something else. Something smaller, more fragile, but maybe even stronger. It's a life built not on a company's promise, but on our own, like a sapling growing through cracked concrete. We have the quiet evenings and the simple comfort of knowing we faced the worst, and we're still here, together. That's a different kind of rich. This wasn't the life we planned, but it's the life we claimed, with scraped knees, tight budgets, and borrowed hope. I kept the letter. I keep it in a drawer just to remind me. Never again. Watch this next for another gripping tale of retirement gone wrong, plus the lesson you can't afford to miss.